Good day, everyone. Today we are going to talk about inclusive assessment, focusing on constructed response assessments for youth learners and how this applies and edukasyon sa pagpapakatao grade 4 with mga laro ng lahi kasama ang kapwa bata. So, what is inclusive assessment? Number one, it is a way of checking our students and making sure that all learners are included, especially those with special educational needs. In our context, the mute learners. Instead of just focusing on the test scores or labeling students by their disabilities, it looks at what each student can do and how they can improve. Why inclusive assessment matters. School needs the right tools to support the learners with special educational needs or LSENs. To include every student effectively, school must be able to assess what learners can do and what help they need to grow. On the inclusive assessment, we should also focus on the foundational skills. These assessments measures foundational skills like reading, understanding, communicating, and interacting. These are the building blocks of learning. On the other hand, it also emphasizes those critical abilities that let our students learn and thrive. We also use learning progression. And as you can see on our slide, I created a ladder that has a now, next, and support. Learning progression shows step-by-step growth, meaning us teachers can see what learners know now, what they need, or what they can learn next, and then help they need for the next topic. Meaning, it makes teaching more personalized and smarter. Under the DepEd order, find a child policy, it highlights the SWAN assessment and the reporting program. So what is it? It is a user-friendly assessment tool made for learners with special needs to group learners by their disabilities rather than focusing on their unique strengths. So instead of labeling by our learners by disability, SWANS highlights their strengths. It encourages inclusion in regular classroom. Aside from that, it also helps teachers to identify what their student needs in their classroom. Actually, inclusive assessment is really supported here in the Philippines, especially the DepEd. They released a DepEd policy or DepEd order, which is a DepEd child find policy. It helps locate children with speech or communication difficulties even without a formal diagnosis. They use MFAT or multi-factor assessment tool to screen strengths and weakness when it comes to communication. This policy does not limit to for our mute learners, but also to our learners with different disabilities. As I mentioned earlier, empath is like a checkup tool for students. It checks how they learn and communicate, and it guides teachers and schools in how to support the child, like giving them alternative ways to answer. For example, for our mute learners, they can draw, write, or act, or referring them to a specialist if needed. We have two types of assessment. I created a table here to explain it in layman's term or in a more understandable way. We have the selected response and constructed response. If you see your teacher or if you see teachers using multiple choice, it means they are using a selected response assessment. While if they ask you to draw, write essays, or do performances, it is under constructed response. Under inclusive assessments, we have constructed response. As I mentioned earlier, this can be used for our mute learners. Instead of speaking, mute learners can show their answers in other ways like writing, drawing, or doing an action. Constructed response lets them explain what they know in a way that fits them, not just through talking. For example, drawing. Instead of speaking, mute learners can draw how they show respect and values said, meaning there is an equally valid response. We can also use written answer. For older learners, writing or typing short answer works. For example, explain in two sentences why cooperation is important in games. And aside from that, we can also use performance task. Performance task lets mute learners use actions. As teachers, can observe our learners through their gestures, role play, or group work as our assessment. In grade 4 EST, we have mga laro ng lahi, and I am going to show you an assessment example for that. Um, these mga laro ng lahi, we teach games or teamwork and respect and Filipino culture. For example, instead of verbal answers, we can use or we can teach mute learners that they can demonstrate fairness in playing luksong tinik with their classmates. So how do we assess mute learners? Under the depth order, they've mentioned that inclusivity. We look at what our learners do, not just what they say. Since mute learners may not speak, teachers can check their actions, gestures, drawings, or written work. Teachers can watch how the learners behave in group works. Um, for example, as I mentioned earlier, in mga laro ng lahi, we can check how they play the game or how they behave during the group work or do they show respect during the game, and of course we can give them alternatives. Instead of recitation, we can allow them to draw, recite, or act out their answers. um, we have performance-based assessments now. Instead of answering a paper test, learners can perform a task that shows what they know. For mute learners, they can demonstrate values like teamwork during a group game, which is the best example per mga laro ng lahi. We let the students play and we assess and we observe our learners how they do teamwork during a group game. They can show respect by helping a classmate and they can do role play, a situation to express their understanding. For our conclusion, inclusive assessments adapt the system to fit it with our learners. With constructed response tasks, every learner has a voice, even without words. That's it for inclusive assessment. Thank you everyone for listening. And if you have questions, you can ask or message me.